When most people picture Rome's decline, they imagine rough tribes battering gates, standards tumbling, or emperors tasting poison under cold marble. But empires rarely explode only from outside pressure. They rot from within, and the most corrosive acid almost always runs through their money. Rome did not unravel just because of invasions or palace plots. It unraveled because its currency failed. The warning still applies to every modern economy that assumes it can tamper with money and escape the bill. For centuries, the backbone of Roman exchange was the silver denarius. First struck around 211 BCE, it was nearly pure silver and trusted from Britannia's reign to Syria's deserts. Soldiers took their pay in it, merchants demanded it, households stored savings in it. The coin was not simply money, it was trust pressed into metal. As confidence in Rome rose, so did confidence in the denarius. Empire and coin were yoked. By the way, if you love money, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Now, let's continue. But running an empire is expensive. Legions must be funded, roads and aqueducts maintained, frontiers defended, and distant wars supplied. By the 2nd century CE, Rome was stretched thin fending off Germanic incursions, facing Parthian pressure in the east, and quelling unrest at home. Tax receipts lagged behind obligations. Instead of provoking revolt with higher taxes, emperors turned to an old seductive tool, debasement. They lowered the silver content of the denarius while keeping its face the same. The figures mapped the slide. Under Augustus, at the empire's dawn, a denarius held roughly 95% silver. By Caracalla's reign in the early 3rd century, its silver had sunk to around half. By the time of Gallienus, mid-3rd century, it contained less than 5% silver, a bronze flake with a superficial wash. People could see the difference and feel it in the market. Inflation followed. Prices rose because money no longer rested on real substance. What once bought a measure of wheat soon bought a handful. This was not theory. It shattered daily life. Soldiers demanded higher pay to keep up with rising costs. Merchants refused debased coins, asking for gold, goods, or foreign money. Local exchange reverted to barter because coinage was no longer trusted. And as confidence frayed, rulers issued even cheaper coins, hoping more pieces would substitute for value. The loop fed on itself, the same pattern that haunts later inflations. The spiral crested in the crisis of the 3rd century. From 235 to 284 CE, Rome staggered through invasions, plague, civil wars, and economic breakdown. Emperors flashed across the stage, some lasting only months before a sword ended their tenure. Beneath the drama lay a wrecked monetary engine. Taxes were assessed in coins that shrank in worth. Farmers walked away from fields rather than pay levies and bad money. Trade networks cracked. The state lunged for desperate fixes price controls, requisitions, forced services, taxes in kind. None restored trust. Diocletian tried to cauterize the wound. In 301 CE, he issued the Edict on maximum prices, fixing ceilings for more than 1,000 goods and wages, with death for violators. But no decree can heal a sick unit of account. When the money itself fails, law cannot will it sound. A black market bloomed, official stalls withered. People learned that statutes cannot turn base metal into stable value. Ultimately, Rome abandoned the denarius. Around 312 CE, Constantine introduced the solidus, a consistently pure gold coin. It brought a measure of stability and endured for centuries in the Eastern Empire, yet the West had been hollowed out. Years of debasement had gnawed Rome's economic core. Armies became harder to maintain, commerce thinned, and social trust drained away. The fall of Rome was not a single crash, but a long unspooling and currency collapse was one of its sharpest threads. What does this teach today? That the destruction of money often becomes the destruction of states. Roman rulers issued coins that looked the same while holding less substance. Modern governments can be tempted to mirror the trick with paper and digits expanding balance sheets, suppressing rates, inflating debts into dust. The outcome repeats. The public pays, savings erode, trust cracks. History kept grading papers after Rome. Major inflationary crises echo the same arc. Authorities debase to cover gaps. Those holding real assets protect themselves. Ordinary households, paid in weakening units, absorb the loss. Rome provides the first comprehensive case study, a blueprint for breakdown. Leap to the 20th century. After World War I, Germany staggered under reparations. Berlin financed the unpayable by printing marks, a paper parallel to Rome's metal gambit. By 1923, hyperinflation burned. A loaf that had cost a single mark before the war sold for hundreds of billions by autumn. Wages came home in wheelbarrows, pensions vanished, debts dissolved. Owners of land, factories, or foreign currency fared better. Money lost meaning, and the despair fertilized extremism, preparing the runway for dictatorship. Zimbabwe followed the script in the 2000s. Land seizures, collapsing output, and rising obligations pushed the state to its presses. By 2008, prices doubled roughly daily. The annual inflation rate rocketed into absurd astronomical figures. Shopkeepers could not change tags quickly enough. Eventually, the country abandoned its own notes and transacted in foreign currencies. Again, leaders tried to cheat reality. Again, citizens paid. Nor is this only about catastrophic extremes. In developed economies, the Roman impulse lingers. Consider the United States. In 1971, President Richard Nixon closed the gold window, cutting the last tie between the dollar and a tangible anchor. The dollar became fiat-backed by trust in institutions rather than metal. With the anchor gone, the temptation to spend beyond means grew. Over decades, debt swelled, money supply expanded, and purchasing power thinned. We have not needed wheelbarrows, but we have watched steady erosion. What a dollar bought in 1971 requires multiple dollars now. The paper looks unchanged. The underlying value is not. The political art is to sell inflation as progress. Rising nominal wages are paraded as prosperity, even when living costs outpace pay. Borrowing is rebranded as investment, even when it funds consumption. Stock indices are cited as proof of shared wealth, even though ownership is concentrated. As Roman emperors insisted nothing fundamental had changed, modern leaders insist the same, while extracting value quietly from every paycheck. What makes today's version more dangerous is scale. Rome's crisis was imperial, Weimar's was national, Zimbabwe's was local. Now, fiat currencies span the globe, debts tower across borders, and central banks can create trillions at the first tremor. The next convulsion, if it comes, will not respect frontiers. It will ripple worldwide, and the heaviest burden will fall not on elites who hold hard assets, but on millions whose salaries, pensions, and savings are denominated in fragile units. So, what should an individual learn from Rome's currency saga? First, inflation is rarely an accident. It is policy, the quiet tax that has unstitched regimes for 2 millennia. Second, durable wealth lives in assets that hold value when money stumbles: land, resilient skills, productive businesses, and essential resources. Third, stability is not permanent. A citizen of the first century would have laughed at the idea that his coin might be shunned. A German in 1913 would have scoffed at wheelbarrows. A Zimbabwean in the 1980s expected normalcy. Yet the same storyline unfolded. Rome's unraveling shows how systems fail gradually, then suddenly, as trust evaporates. When money loses credibility, contracts falter, trade freezes, armies drift, and legitimacy decays. Outsiders at the gate may deliver the final shove, but the mortal wound is usually struck inside the treasury. One more layer clarifies the mechanism. Debasement is seigniorage. Authorities create more claims than there are resources, so early spenders benefit while late receivers lose. As silver content fell, good coins were hoarded and bad coins circulated. Gresham's law in motion. To preserve real intake, officials raised nominal taxes, levied in kind, and bound producers to land and craft. The army turned to requisitions. The grain and nona weighed heavier than pay. When money fails, institutions improvise. Credit chains shrink to spot trades, guilds, temples, and magnates become brokers. Rents are assessed in grain or indexed to trusted metal. Each workaround makes local sense while breaking broader markets. This is not metal worship. Any standard can fail when politics overwhelms discipline. The real safeguard is constraint rules that bite even when budgets hurt. Rome burned that constraint, treating the mint as a cure for strategic, fiscal, and demographic strain. The mint bought time at compounding cost. Modern versions aren't identical, but the incentives rhyme. Printing appears painless beside taxes or cuts, so rescues multiply. The prudent answer is not panic, but preparation. Anchor part of life, where policy cannot easily hollow it out. Skills you can sell, assets that produce, communities that trade. Judge prosperity by purchasing power, not by nominal charts. Remember, when choices turn hard, Politics often lets the currency carry the pain. Sound money is a public good built on trust, scarcity, and stewardship. When leaders honor that triad, commerce flourishes and citizens can plan. When they do not, the invoice arrives with interest charged and higher prices and damaged institutions. The pattern is old. Learn it now, and you will recognize it when the names and dates change. If you made it this far, drop a plus in the comments your badge for finishing the deep dive. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more long-form stories where money, history, and power collide. Curious about earlier empires of capital? Check out our Others video,